There is a quiet illusion that many Americans carry when they imagine life in Canada, a belief that crossing the northern border is more of a climate shift than a cultural one. The roads will look the same, the signs will be in English, the values, they assume, will mostly align, but the moment their feet touch Canadian ground, that illusion begins to dissolve, not through any grand confrontation, but through a series of subtle, almost imperceptible shifts. The air moves differently here, the social rhythm slows, and behind every ordinary encounter is a quiet signal that something is, indeed, not quite the same. Americans arriving in Canada often describe a strange kind of emotional disorientation. It isn't dramatic. No one gasps at the sight of a supermarket or panics on public transport, but it builds moment by moment as assumptions quietly unravel. The first thing they notice is the politeness, not as an affectation, but as a national reflex. A stranger might hold a door just a few seconds longer than expected. A bus driver is thanked by every passenger without exception, and when someone bumps into you, they apologize instantly, sometimes even when it's your fault. These small gestures, repeated across 1,000 daily interactions, create a kind of atmospheric calm that many Americans find both soothing and bewildering. It continues in the way people speak. Conversations with strangers are gentle, often cautious. There's little sarcasm or confrontation. Even in disagreement, the tone rarely sharpens. Canadians, many Americans observe, speak with a softness that doesn't signal weakness, but intentionality, a cultural habit of keeping the emotional temperature low. It's a stark contrast to the more direct, emotionally expressive communication styles common in the US, where confidence is often shown through assertiveness. In Canada, restraint is not repression, it's a signal of respect. Then there's the pace. On sidewalks, in cafes, in checkout lines, time seems to stretch. People walk slower, they wait more patiently. No one is rushing to claim space or cut ahead. For Americans who are used to the background hum of urgency, this stillness can feel surreal. Public spaces don't just look calm, they feel calm. And for many, that stillness triggers something unexpected, a sense of unease. Because when the external pace slows, the internal noise grows louder. Without the pressure to move fast, many realize how much of their identity was built on motion. Even urban life in Canada seems to hum with a different frequency. In cities like Vancouver or Toronto, the crowds are there, but not the chaos. You can sit in a busy cafe and still hear yourself think. You can ride the subway without the background of arguments or raised voices. People occupy public space with a kind of quiet coordination. They give room without being asked. They lower their volume instinctively. It is not a culture of avoidance, but of mutual allowance. And for Americans accustomed to sharper edges in daily interactions, this creates both admiration and confusion. Why isn't everyone competing for space? Soon, more differences emerge, some so mundane they're easy to miss. Tipping culture, for example, lacks the same unspoken pressure. While Canadians tip, the transaction carries less emotional weight. A smaller tip doesn't imply disrespect. It's gratitude, not obligation, or the way success is measured. In many American cities, conversations quickly drift toward ambition, income, titles. But in Canada, such topics often feel out of place. Modesty is more than a virtue here. It's a social courtesy. Loud self-promotion, which might be admired in the US, can feel jarring and out of sync with local norms. As the weeks pass, Americans begin to notice that even the weather carries cultural weight. The cold, which at first seems like an obstacle, becomes a kind of shared mythology. Canadians don't just endure winter, they coexist with it. Children walk to school in blizzards. Neighbors dig each other out of snowbanks without being asked. There is no heroic framing to this, only a practical acceptance. The climate, in its extremity, has quietly shaped a society that values preparation over panic, endurance over drama, and community over isolation. Gradually, these differences begin to shift something deeper. The quietness, once unnerving, starts to feel like space. The restraint, once mistaken for distance, begins to read as care, and the slowness, once seen as inefficiency, becomes a kind of hidden luxury. For many Americans, this is the turning point, the realization that life here is not just slightly different. It is built on a foundation of values that operate in near opposite ways from what they've known, and the gap, once invisible, is now impossible to ignore. The deeper one settles into Canadian life, the more nuanced the cultural contrasts become. In American cities, noise is often the backdrop to daily life, a mixture of energy, ambition, and unpredictability. But in Canada, there's a curious kind of quiet, not just the absence of volume, but a collective agreement to move through the world gently. Public transportation reflects this perfectly. Trains and buses are filled with people, yet there's little chaos. No shouting across aisles, no loud phone conversations, just a subtle choreography of shared space, where silence is not awkward, but respected. That calm extends into the workplace. In American professional environments, there's often an unspoken race for recognition, for promotions, for relevance. The hustle culture permeates everything. But in Canada, the rhythm of work often feels less performative. People work hard, but there's less spectacle about it. Work-life balance isn't something earned, it's expected. Taking a full lunch break, using all your vacation days, and leaving the office on time are not signs of slacking. They are expressions of a national belief. Life isn't meant to be consumed by work. Healthcare is another layer of quiet culture shock. For Americans used to navigating a complex system of insurance plans, co-pays, and deductibles, Canada's universal healthcare model feels like stepping into another paradigm. While it has its flaws, wait times are a common frustration. The underlying principle is what truly shifts perspective. Healthcare here is not a privilege or a commodity. It is a public trust, and that shapes more than policy. It shapes how people move through the world, less guarded, less afraid of financial ruin from a broken arm or a surprise diagnosis. Even the way Canadians use language reflects deeper social values. The word sorry, often mocked as overused, reveals something fundamental. It's not about guilt, it's about harmony. When someone says sorry for interrupting, for brushing past you, or even when you make the mistake, it's a social lubricant, a way to smooth the edges of interaction. For Americans, who often view apology as an admission of fault, this can be confusing. But in Canada, sorry functions like a handshake, a soft agreement that everyone is trying to keep things respectful. There's a powerful humility that flows through Canadian society, a kind of cultural minimalism. Flashy status symbols are less common, cars are practical, homes are modest, conversations about money, while not taboo, are approached with caution and balance. Bragging feels out of place. Instead, Canadians often default to self-deprecating humor or quiet pride. This doesn't mean ambition is absent, it's just less visible. In a country where success is measured by how grounded you are, rather than how far you've climbed, social pressure moves in a different direction, towards subtlety, not spectacle. Perhaps one of the most unexpected transformations occurs in how Americans start to interpret community. In the US, individualism is a cultural cornerstone, self-reliance, personal freedom, standing out. In Canada, the balance tilts toward collective responsibility, not in a grand ideological sense, but in the everyday. People hold doors longer, wait their turn more patiently, and clean up after themselves in shared spaces. It's not politeness for a politeness' sake. It's a deeply ingrained belief that society functions better when everyone plays their part, however small, and those small parts add up. Shoveling a neighbor's sidewalk without being asked, letting a car merge without speeding up to block them, donating to a local fundraiser not for recognition, but because it's part of being in a community. These aren't grand gestures, they're cultural reflexes, and for Americans used to living in a system where individual success often takes precedence over shared well-being, this quiet collectivism can feel both unfamiliar and deeply comforting. As seasons change, so does perspective. Winter, once a dreaded force, becomes a backdrop for resilience and cooperation. Spring, when it arrives, feels almost symbolic, a reward for endurance. Holidays like Thanksgiving, held in October, remind newcomers that this isn't a mirror image of the US, but a country with its own rhythms, traditions, and emotional seasons. Even national identity is worn differently. Patriotism here is quieter, less declarative. It doesn't shout, it nods and slowly. Americans find themselves absorbing these differences. They start waiting their turn without scanning for a faster line. They lower their voices in public, not out of fear, but out of alignment. They apologize when someone else bumps into them, not because they've been trained to, but because it feels natural now. These aren't conscious choices. They're the result of prolonged exposure to a cultural atmosphere that rewards calm, respect, and humility. What begins as observation turns into participation, not out of pressure, but out of resonance. Because in the stillness of Canadian life, something powerful happens. Americans begin to hear themselves more clearly, not the version shaped by competition, urgency, and noise, but the one softened by kindness, steadied by community, and awakened to a new definition of normal. By the time months have passed, many Americans living in Canada no longer feel like tourists navigating a foreign system. They begin to embody the same habits that once struck them as strange. The cultural shift doesn't arrive through declarations or grand epiphanies. It happens in small, invisible rewrites of instinct, a deeper pause before speaking, a longer glance toward others before stepping forward, a growing awareness that kindness, here, isn't strategic, it's simply expected. They start to notice how their internal compass has recalibrated. The absence of urgency becomes a form of clarity. When someone is late, there's less irritation. When plans change, there's less drama. The Canadian way, with its understated flexibility and quiet resilience, teaches a new rhythm, one that doesn't just accept change, but absorbs it with grace. There is no obsession with optimization. Life is not treated like a race to win, but a space to navigate with care. Social trust, too, begins to feel normal rather than remarkable. Americans who once instinctively locked everything now find themselves leaving laptops unattended in coffee shops without fear. They begin to believe, not hope, but believe, that someone will return a lost wallet, that a stranger offering help has no hidden motive. It's a recalibration of emotional posture. Suspicion relaxes into curiosity, guardedness softens into comfort, and that subtle shift unlocks something far more powerful. A sense of emotional safety. That emotional safety radiates outward. In workplaces, it appears in the way colleagues check in on each other, not for performance, but for well-being. In neighborhoods, it shows up when someone quietly clears a patch of sidewalk for the elderly couple next door. On highways, it's visible in the way drivers let each other merge without aggression. In every corner of daily life, there's a reinforcement of the idea that people are not obstacles. They're part of the same shared story. This shift in mindset transforms not only behavior, but perception. Americans who once equated progress with busyness begin to appreciate stillness as a form of progress. They find themselves defending slowness, protecting weekends, valuing the quiet dinner instead of the packed schedule. And with that, their sense of self subtly expands. Success is no longer defined solely by achievement, but by the quality of relationships, the depth of calm, the ability to exist without always performing. Even notions of identity begin to shift. In the US, belonging often hinges on assertion, speaking loudly, being seen, proving one's value. But in Canada, belonging is quieter. It's offered through inclusion, not requested through performance. It's felt in the way a community rallies after a storm, in the way people shovel snow from the public sidewalk because no one else will, in the way cities celebrate diversity with spectacle, but with quiet coexistence. Difference isn't erased, it's folded in. Eventually, the transformation becomes self-sustaining. Americans start thanking the bus driver, not because it's what others do, but because it feels incomplete not to. They begin to measure social interactions by depth and more by respect. They understand that not every connection must be intense to be real, that civility itself is a form of emotional architecture. The culture of gentleness that once seemed performative now feels like a necessary glue, holding the social fabric together. And then comes the moment they return to the United States for a visit, for good, or somewhere in between. That's when the difference strikes hardest. The volume feels louder, the pace sharper, conversations more abrupt. They begin to notice how quickly people speak over each other, how rare it is to see strangers holding doors, how tension hums through even casual interactions. The contrast is no longer intellectual, it's physical, emotional, embodied. What once felt like normal now feels aggressive, and what once seemed overly polite now feels deeply human. It's not that one culture is better than the other. It's that they nurture different emotional climates. And for Americans who have lived in Canada long enough to internalize its rhythms, returning home feels like stepping out of a warm bath into a cold wind. Not painful, but jarring. Not bad, but undeniable. In the end, Canada doesn't change people with force. It changes them with space. The space to breathe, to reflect, to live without constant alertness. It offers a mirror to American culture, not through criticism, but through contrast. A lived reminder that societies are not only built on systems and laws, but on habits, attitudes, and invisible emotional agreements. That kindness isn't a personality trait. It's a shared practice. And that may be the most lasting gift Canada offers, the quiet revelation that life can be lived with more softness, more cooperation, and more trust, not as an exception, but as a norm. The kind of life that doesn't demand proof of worth, but offers dignity as a given. For many Americans, that realization is not just a cultural surprise. It's a personal one, and once discovered, it becomes a lens through which the world never looks quite the same again.